The room went silent the moment Jasmine Crockett stepped to the podium, the glare of television cameras catching every edge of her composed expression. She held a single, sealed envelope in her hand, the kind of envelope that spelled catastrophe for anyone it touched. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the gathered press corps, Senate staffers, and the flicker of anxiety in the eyes of the young pages who had only ever heard her name in hushed tones. The air felt thick enough to taste metallic, anticipatory. Then, in the blink of an eye, she slit the seal and let the contents fall onto the desk before her, as though releasing the very breath of truth into the world. "This is what they don't want you to see," she said, her voice steady but charged with urgency. "Inside this envelope is evidence of a deliberate effort to manipulate our courts. Evidence that points straight to Donald Trump Jr." The room convulsed into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs exploded, and aides scrambled to shield microphones. Yet in the midst of the tumult, Jasmine remained unmoved, her eyes locking on the camera lens as if daring the world to look away. "You have 30 minutes before this goes live online," she continued. "By then, every American will know what really happened." And with that simple, devastating announcement, Jasmine Crockett had everyone leaning in, because the stakes weren't just high, they were seismic. Could one Congresswoman's revelation topple the carefully constructed narrative of a powerful political dynasty? Could she hold Donald Trump Jr. accountable for a leak that threatened to undermine the entire Supreme Court? Those questions hung in the air like thunderclouds, and the nation braced itself for the storm to come. From the moment Jasmine entered Congress, she had been labeled a rising star, the fierce, unflinching voice of a new generation of leadership. But nothing in her 5 years on the Hill had prepared her for this moment. Standing in a shadowed corridor behind the Rayburn office building, clutching a photograph of text messages she wasn't supposed to have, knowing that Donald Trump Jr. was about to crumble under the weight of his own hubris. She had received the tip just that morning, delivered by a whistleblower whose identity she had sworn never to reveal. The message was simple: they're moving on the leak now. If you want the truth, meet me at 8 o'clock in the lobby. Underneath the fluorescent lights, Jasmine's pulse raced as she reviewed the threads of digital correspondence on her secured phone. Nothing about that leak was incidental, nothing accidental. This was a calculated strike, an attempt to rig the judiciary in plain sight. And it was her job to ensure justice didn't slip through the cracks. She remembered her campaign trail, the moments of quiet doubt that crept in when the adversaries of change seemed insurmountable. She recalled coachings from veteran staffers, urging caution, reminding her that playing with fire in Washington meant getting burned. But now, pressed into action by a leak that threatened the very bedrock of American democracy, she summoned a resolve that roared louder than any warning. The corridor felt colder than usual, the polished marble floor echoing her footsteps as she made her way to the cramped visitor's elevator. Her breath came in measured puffs. She could taste adrenaline mixed with the tang of her mini breath spray. She closed her eyes as the elevator sank 5 stories, the numbers flickering into sinning urgency. Could she really expose the most powerful family in America? Was she prepared for the repercussions, personal, political, and maybe even legal? Every instinct screamed to retreat, to gather more proof, to hide behind the shield of caution. But something stronger propelled her forward, the knowledge that truth, once buried, only grows darker in the shadows. The lobby was a swirl of morning commuters, laptops balanced on rolling briefcases, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. Among them, a figure in a tailored navy suit stood waiting, his face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. Jasmine approached with quiet determination, each step a countdown to a revelation that could rewrite the narrative of the Supreme Court scandal. The stranger extended a USB drive, the words Crockett, J scrawled on a piece of masking tape. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Jasmine nodded, tucked the drive into her leather jacket, and slipped past the labyrinthine security checkpoints that funneled most visitors into a river of bureaucratic anonymity. She moved through the maze of hallways leading to her office, mind whirling with scenarios, leaked judicial opinions, back-channel calls to justices, documents redacted to conceal a conspiracy. Anything was possible. The ornate carpet beneath her heels felt impossibly soft, cushioned against the gravity of her mission. She imagined Donald Trump Jr., already jittery from whispers in New York tabloids, learning that she possessed the smoking gun. Would he steel himself against the blow? Or would his carefully crafted public persona crack under pressure? Would he strike back like a rusted gate slamming shut, or attempt to silence her with money and influence? These questions hovered in the hallway's stagnant air as she reached her office door. Inside, her chief of staff, Maria Alvarez, looked up from a stack of files, her eyes narrowing with concern. "You look like you're carrying a thunderstorm in your pocket," Maria said, her tone low and urgent. Jasmine offered a half-smile but said nothing. Instead, she plugged in the USB drive, fingers steady despite the tremor she refused to show. The screen flickered as a single folder icon appeared, Trump Jr. /leak/leak_evidence. She double-clicked. Months of correspondence, internal memos, phone logs, and encrypted messages spilled onto the monitor, each file more damning than the last. As she scrolled through the names of justices, campaign advisors, and shadowy intermediaries, a knot formed in her stomach. This wasn't merely a leak of confidential documents. It was a betrayal of the American judicial system, an orchestrated maneuver to tilt decisions, to sway votes, to corrupt the very foundations of impartiality. There was no time to waste. "Here's what we do," Jasmine said, meeting Maria's steady gaze. "We bring this to the Ethics Committee, and we schedule a hearing, public, televised, no delays. We call every witness we have, judges, clerks, lobbyists, anyone whose life is touched by these documents. We make sure the American people see this for what it is, a deliberate manipulation of justice for political gain." Maria hesitated, weighing Jasmine's fierce conviction against the political wildfire it threatened to ignite. "Are you sure, Jasmine? Because once it's out there, you can't pull it back. Trump Jr. will come after you like a pack of wolves." Jasmine's lips curved into something like a grin, fierce and unyielding. "Then let him come," she replied. "I didn't get where I am by running from wolves." By noon, the press had assembled outside the Rayburn building like sharks circling a wounded seal. Rumors of a bombshell revelation had leaked through Capitol Hill grapevines, and news crews jostled for position, tripods clicking into place. Jasmine arrived with Maria in tow, the evidence clutched in a manila envelope under her arm. She ascended the steps, each footfall echoing off the stone, as security screened her IDs and whispered among themselves. Reporters craned to capture her expression, eyes narrowed with determination, lips pressed into a line that said she was about to change history. In the background, the marble columns stood as silent witnesses to an unfolding drama that would eclipse every political scandal of the past decade. Could the system withstand another seismic shake? Could the American people, already weary from endless partisan warfare, bear witness to a truth so unsettling that it threatened to tear the judiciary apart? Within her, Jasmine felt a swirl of determination and dread, as though she were standing on the edge of a chasm, ready to leap. The hearing chamber itself felt like a cathedral. High ceilings, ornate wooden panels, and an air of solemnity usually reserved for life and death decisions. At the center, a long oak table bore the burden of a dozen microphones, glowing softly like the eyes of 1,000 silent witnesses. Members of the Ethics Committee filed in, their faces etched with curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, barely concealed contempt. At the other end of the room, Donald Trump Jr. sat alone in a cushioned chair, his tailored suit impeccable but his posture rigid, as though bracing for a blow he refused to acknowledge. He thumbed through his phone, brow furrowed. Had he expected this confrontation? Surely, he must have known the evidence was damning. Yet there he sat, an offense in polished shoes. A ripple of anticipation ran through the assembled crowd. Even the janitorial staff paused to watch. Judge Catherine Rivers, presiding over the Ethics Committee, rapped her gavel. The sound cracked like a whip, cutting through the buzz of conversation. "Congresswoman Crockett will present her findings," she said, voice echoing in the vaulted space. Jasmine stood, adjusted the microphone, and drew a steadying breath. She looked at Donald Jr. directly, allowing her gaze to settle on the flicker of uncertainty she saw there. Because yes, even the most practiced politician cracked like thin glass when confronted with incontrovertible evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the committee," she began, voice firm, "what you are about to see will challenge everything you believe about access, influence, and the sanctity of our courts. But it is only through confronting the truth that we can preserve this nation's integrity." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she clicked a remote. The projector flickered to life, illuminating a series of encrypted text exchanges between Trump Jr. and a mid-level aide, messages that spoke in code about ensuring favorable rulings and leveraging contacts on the bench. Her heart hammered, but she continued, describing each document with meticulous clarity, handwritten notes from a clerk, email chains between campaign operatives and federal clerks, financial ledgers tracing funds earmarked for judicial priority. Each piece fit together like gears in a machine designed to subvert justice. She saw Trump Jr.'s face blanch as page after page revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. "The question," Jasmine said, her voice ringing in the hush that had fallen over the chamber, "is not whether Mr. Trump Jr. knew about this operation, but why he chose to participate. Did he believe that the rules didn't apply to him? Did he think that, because of his last name, he could toy with the system without consequence?" She let the rhetorical question hover, because that was the knife at the heart of the matter: entitlement versus accountability. The transcripts on the screen flickered, documents clutched by the solemnity of their significance. There was no hyperbole here, only cold, calculated communication that laid bare a betrayal of the public trust. Trump Jr. rose from his seat, face reddened, jaw clenched. A hush fell across the room as reporters held their breath. He took a step forward, ready to unleash a practiced speech, an appeal to loyalty, an assertion of innocence, a threat to weaponize his father's name. But when he opened his mouth, his words faltered. Jasmine watched as the mask slipped. Behind the carefully crafted persona was a man grappling with a truth that hurt more than he'd anticipated. His voice came out shaky, defensive. "Congresswoman," he began, "you're misrepresenting," but the evidence was unassailable. Each file on that screen was a bullet in an otherwise empty barrel. Under the scrutiny of the Ethics Committee, under the glare of the nation's eyes, he found no refuge in lies. The room felt too small for his agitation. She could practically see the frayed threads of his composure unraveling. Jasmine leaned into her own inner monologue as she watched him attempt to deflect. Could he really break? Could this moment be the one where the veneer of power shattered into something ugly and vulnerable? She remembered late nights in law school, when she studied the intricacies of judicial ethics, the fragile balance between influence and impartiality. She'd always believed that those entrusted with power would hold it sacred. Now that belief was tested, and she felt a surge of righteous anger that lent her voice an edge of steel. "Mr. Trump," she said, quiet but resolved, "the documents we presented were obtained through legal channels, corroborated by multiple sources, and have been authenticated. This isn't about politics, it's about the rule of law. You had every opportunity to walk away, but you chose to walk through this door." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. At that midpoint, the narrative shifted. Time felt suspended. The press cameras hummed, capturing every flinch and flicker. Reporters scribbled furiously, recording the moment when a scion of one of the wealthiest families in America stumbled under the weight of his own choices. And yet, beneath the surface-level drama, a deeper lesson was unfolding. A lesson about how the courts, often cloaked in the dignity of marble and robes, could be vulnerable to manipulation when a few key players decided rules were mere suggestions. Jasmine felt a flash of insight. This wasn't just about one man. It was a reflection of a system that needed constant vigilance. If Donald Trump Jr. could bend it, what about the next person who thought themselves above accountability? She scribbled notes to herself, a reflection that would later become part of her closing argument. Power without accountability is not power, it's tyranny. And tyranny thrives in silence. The hearing recessed for a brief lunch break, an intentional pause orchestrated by Jasmine's team to let the bombshell she dropped percolate through the halls of power. In the corridor, senators and representatives whispered as she passed, some offering nods of respect, others casting cautious glances. She felt a tug of exhaustion in her shoulders, a subtle tremor beneath her calm exterior. But she unfolded a small sheet of paper Maria had handed her, a note listing the witnesses lined up for the afternoon session: federal clerks, former campaign aides, and a legal scholar from Georgetown Law who specialized in judicial corruption. Each name represented a puzzle piece that, once assembled, would complete the portrait of a conspiracy so vast it threatened to topple confidence in the Supreme Court itself. As she sat in the waiting area, Jasmine let her mind drift to the larger implications. She thought of Chief Justice Hopkins, a measured man who had once lectured her on the importance of judicial integrity during a chance encounter at a fundraiser. Would he speak out? And if he did, would his colleagues support him or bury the matter to shield the court's reputation? The fragility of democratic institutions felt stark against the crisp white walls of the hearing room. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, picturing a courtroom in turmoil, robes swirling, gavel pounding, and a nation watching as the pillars of justice trembled. The thought made her pulse quicken, but she knew she couldn't falter. Not now. Not ever. Because if the Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett could stand firm, maybe there was still hope for the broader system. When the second half of the hearing resumed, Jasmine watched with steely composure as the first witness, a whistleblower known only as Clerk A, took the stand. His face was pale, eyes darting with fear and defiance in equal measure. He testified that he had been instructed to withhold certain judicial opinions from the court's public records. That back-channel instructions had come directly from campaign operatives aligned with Donald Trump Jr. The gasp that rippled through the chamber was audible. Senators exchanged incredulous looks. Trump Jr. shifted in his seat, his earlier bravado replaced by a sullen, frightened silence. The gravity of the accusations hung between them like an invisible noose. Then came witness after witness, a former campaign aide who described clandestine meetings in a book-lined office above a nondescript deli. A legal scholar who reviewed the leaked documents and confirmed that their timing had been orchestrated to coincide with a high-profile Supreme Court decision favorable to the Trump political franchise. An ex-Justice Department attorney who explained how funds had been funneled through a shell organization labeled Judicial Initiative Fund, a name meant to obscure its true purpose. Each account intersected with the next, weaving a tapestry of corruption that extended into the highest chambers of power. And every time someone looked at Jasmine, she felt their expectations pressing on her shoulders, as though her silence or her questions could tip the scales of fate. Throughout the afternoon, Jasmine punctuated the testimony with probing questions. Were you directed to alter the timing of the release? Did you ever feel uncomfortable with the instructions you received? At any point did you question the legality of these orders? Each question was surgical, intended to expose not only the facts but the moral failings of those involved. She watched as Trump Jr. sank lower in his chair, trying to disappear into the background, as though credible deniability might still shield him. But it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. Daisy-chained admissions of wrongdoing formed a crescendo that left no room for doubt. Just before sunset, after 12 straight hours of testimony, the hearing recessed once more. Jasmine walked through the Capitol's grand rotunda, the sinking sun illuminating the dome's stained glass in warm hues of amber and gold. She paused to look up at the inscription carved into the stone above her, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. She thought about the disparate voices she had heard that day, clerks, aides, scholars, each speaking fragments of a larger truth. Their willingness to come forward, despite fear of retaliation, reinforced her belief that democracy still had teeth. And yet, she knew the fight was far from over. This was only the first act in a drama that would stretch for weeks. Congressional votes, legal motions, op-ed wars, talk show battlefields. But for tonight, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, letting the gravity of what she had set in motion settle in her bones. That evening, Jasmine retreated to her modest townhouse in Capitol Hill, a space adorned with framed degrees and campaign memorabilia, but also with family photos, snapshots of her parents smiling on their front porch in Dallas, of her college graduation, and of her wedding to Franklin Rhodes, the retired federal judge who had become her confidant and partner in justice. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at her kitchen table, the half-empty envelope of evidence still in sight. Her phone buzzed with a string of notifications, text messages from worried staffers, news alerts predicting the political fallout, and a voicemail from Chief Justice Hopkins requesting a private meeting tomorrow. She closed her eyes and let her mind sift through the day's events, the tension in the hearing room, the looks of disbelief, the sensation of setting truth loose in a system teetering on the brink. Could she rest tonight, knowing that tomorrow would bring new battles? Doubt flitted across her mind, a familiar shadow. But beneath it, a flicker of vindication pulsed. She had done what needed to be done. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at the Supreme Court steps just as the sun broke through lingering clouds, an almost cinematic glow illuminating the stone columns. A small, respectful crowd of supporters had gathered, law students holding signs that read, "Justice at all costs," civil rights activists wearing T-shirts emblazoned with her name, and ordinary citizens braving the morning chill to witness history. Cherry blossoms drifted down from the trees, petals dancing in the breeze like silent witnesses to the gravity of the moment. Jasmine climbed the steps slowly, aware that cameras lined each banister, capturing every turn of her silhouette. At the top, Chief Justice Hopkins stood waiting, his robes folded neatly, expression unreadable. Jasmine felt a flutter of nerves. This was a meeting that could determine not just her future, but the future of the nation's commitment to impartial justice. They shook hands, her grip firm, his reserved but respectful. In hushed tones, they discussed the leak, the hearing, and the thousands of pages of documents that had come to light. Jasmine watched as Hopkins absorbed every detail, his brows furrowed. She invited him to speak, and he did, his voice calm, resonant with the weight of his office. He spoke of the court's reputation, of the sacred trust placed in 9 individuals to wield the power of the law. He acknowledged that internal protocols had failed, that clerks had been manipulated, and that the court's transparency had been compromised. But he emphasized that the judiciary would not collapse under scandal. Instead, it would emerge stronger if it confronted its shortcomings. "Congresswoman," he said, "your courage in bringing this to light is a testament to the power of democratic oversight. But now we must act swiftly to restore confidence." Jasmine nodded, understanding that the battle had shifted from revelation to reform. They discussed the formation of an independent panel, the need for immediate policy changes, and the potential for new legislation to safeguard against similar breaches. As they spoke, Jasmine felt the immense weight of collective responsibility, 2 branches of government collaborating to mend a fractured system. In the days that followed, the story exploded across every platform. News anchors dissected the hearing, pundits sparred over editorial panels, and social media ignited with hashtags like #JudicialIntegrity and #CrockettExposes. Late-night hosts cracked jokes at Trump Jr.'s expense, while invited experts debated the broader implications for democratic institutions. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office buzzed with a flurry of activity, drafting legislative proposals, organizing town halls, and meeting with legal experts to craft an amendment that would codify new transparency requirements for the Supreme Court. Every moment was infused with intensity. Phone calls with senior senators negotiating support, strategy sessions with her staff, and private conversations with Franklin that charged the quiet of their home with purpose and love. There were nights when the exhaustion threatened to topple her resolve, but in those moments, she recalled the faces of everyday Americans who had emailed her, teachers, veterans, nurses, thanking her for standing up when it seemed no one else would. Amid this whirlwind, Trump Jr. appeared at a press conference in New York, flanked by a cadre of lawyers. His demeanor was defensive, eyes drawn and haunted. He insisted he had been misled by advisors, that he had no knowledge of any illicit plan to leak court documents. He claimed to be a victim of a political witch hunt, throwing out broad accusations of partisan bias. But the damage was done. The hearing's transcript, already etched into the public record, contradicted his every statement. Newspapers printed side-by-side comparisons of his testimony and the direct messages on Jasmine's exhibit screen. Social media users compared his shifting narrative to a fish caught in the tide, constantly gasping for a breath of plausibility. In Washington, his allies scrambled for cover. Some expressed tepid support, others distanced themselves entirely. It was a spectacle of desperation. His meltdown played out in real time, broadcast on every channel. Back in D.C., Jasmine watched with measured detachment. She'd anticipated his pushback, his attempt at damage control. It was a theater she had seen before, politicians rewriting history to save their skins. But this was different. This time, the truth carried the weight. Her phone pinged with a notification of a leaked video showing Trump Jr. stumbling over his words, sweat beading on his forehead. She let out a small sigh, not of triumph, but of somber realization that the moment she had orchestrated was only the beginning of a long reckoning. She turned her attention to her next task, the drafting of the Judicial Transparency and Accountability Act, a bill that would require the Supreme Court to publish drafts of opinions in a designated time frame, impose stricter rules on clerk communications, and establish an independent inspector general's office for the judiciary. This would be her legacy, enshrining safeguards that would outlast any single scandal or administration. At the midpoint of this unfolding saga, Jasmine paused to reflect, not for an audience, but for herself. Late one night, she sat alone in Franklin's study, the wood-paneled room lined with leather-bound law texts and family photographs. A single desk lamp cast a warm glow, illuminating pages of her preliminary draft. She ran a finger along a passage where she argued that transparency must be more than a buzzword. It must be the bedrock of judicial legitimacy. She recalled Chief Justice Hopkins's words, "Confront shortcomings, emerge stronger." In that quiet moment, she understood that her role extended beyond politics. She was engaging in a deeper struggle to preserve the soul of American democracy. She reflected on her journey, a young girl in Dallas watching her parents navigate civil rights marches, feeling the stirrings of civic duty, the first taste of victory when she won her congressional seat. The late nights in her Capitol Hill apartment drafting bills that extolled equality and justice. All those experiences converged here, in her living room, under the soft gleam of the lamp. She saw herself as both a product and a guardian of history, a woman entrusted with a legacy that spanned generations. And she felt the silent promise echo in her mind. We are the keepers of truth. The final push for the Judicial Transparency and Accountability Act unfolded in a flurry of committee hearings, floor debates, and strategic negotiations. Jasmine spearheaded the negotiations, wielding her newfound political capital with precision. She met with Chief Justice Hopkins behind closed doors, forging a fragile alliance. He would encourage his colleagues to accept certain public accountability measures in exchange for limited concessions. She courted moderate Republicans, reminding them that an impaired judiciary threatened every American, regardless of party. She addressed town halls and swing districts, standing at dusty podiums in community centers, listening as constituents recounted their frustration with a system they felt was rigged against them. Every anecdote they shared of wrongful convictions, of judges recusing themselves because of undisclosed ties, reinforced the necessity of her legislation. She recorded each story in her mind, weaving them into the narrative she presented on the House floor. Then came the day of the final vote, an epic showdown reminiscent of the most consequential moments in congressional history. The chamber was packed, the press gallery jammed with journalists trained on the spectacle. Opponents of the bill unleashed a barrage of last-minute attacks. "You're undermining judicial independence," they cried. "This is a partisan power grab." But Jasmine rose to deliver her closing remarks, her voice resolute amidst the storm. She recounted the hearing, detailing how Trump Jr. had nearly compromised the scales of justice. She spoke of the countless citizens whose faith in the system had been shaken. And she posed the question held hostage in her heart. Do we trust that our courts can stand without a clear line of accountability? Or do we believe that, by shining a light, we fortify the very institution that guides our nation? Her words echoed in the hush that followed. One by one, representatives cast their votes. Jasmine watched as the tally flickered on the screen. 215 yeas, 209 nays, and a handful of absentees. The margin was slim, but it was enough. The bill passed. The applause was thunderous, tentative at first, then swelling into a roar that shook the chamber. Jasmine remained standing, absorbing the moment with humility tempered by fierce satisfaction. In her mind's eye, she saw images from the morning of the hearing. Her hand slicing open the seal of that envelope, the stunned faces of senators, the pale terror in Trump Jr.'s eyes. And now, here, she stood at the apex of a battle she had waged not for personal glory, but for the soul of a nation. The weight of it pressed on her shoulders, but it was a burden she bore willingly. Yet, as the celebration began, a nagging question lingered. Would the courts honor this newfound transparency, or would they find loopholes to ensure the shadows remained? Would her bill hold up under judicial scrutiny, or would it be struck down by the very institution it sought to reform? She recognized that the work was far from over. This wasn't the end of the story. It was a new chapter, a chapter where vigilance replaced complacency. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine continued to press forward. She collaborated with the Department of Justice to establish the Office of Judicial Compliance, an independent watchdog tasked with auditing court procedures. She oversaw the rollout of new digital platforms where draft opinions and clerk communications would be archived, accessible to scholars, journalists, and citizens alike. She delivered speeches at law schools, reminding future attorneys that ethics weren't a footnote. They were the foundation of every case they would ever argue. And she maintained her watchful gaze on the Supreme Court itself, ensuring that Chief Justice Hopkins and his colleagues adhered to the spirit, not just the letter, of the new laws. Meanwhile, Donald Trump Jr. receded from the forefront, his public persona tarnished by the undeniable truth he had tried to bury. He issued a statement of regret for confusion, but stopped short of admitting wrongdoing. His allies distanced themselves, and the Trump political machine briefly went silent on judicial matters, as if licking its wounds. Yet Jasmine remained vigilant, aware that power often lurks beneath the surface, waiting for another opening. She understood that tomorrow's challenge might not involve leaked documents or public hearings. It could be clandestine lobbying, backroom deals, or social media smears aimed at her integrity. But she felt fortified by her actions, a sense of purpose deeper than any partisan loyalty. She had glimpsed the machinery of manipulation and brought it into the light. In the late spring of the following year, Jasmine found herself in a sunlit auditorium at Georgetown University, accepting an honorary doctorate for her work in judicial transparency. As she approached the podium, she reflected on how far she had come, from a young activist in Dallas to a congresswoman shaking the foundations of the court itself. She looked at the audience, a sea of students eager for change, and she realized something. Her journey, while hard one, was not unique. It was the story of every citizen who refused to let corruption go unchecked, every individual who refused to stay silent when the truth demanded to be spoken. She opened her speech with a question, one that resonated with the crowd. What does it mean to be the keeper of justice? She answered by recounting the day she'd held that envelope, letting its contents spill forth to a nation grappling with betrayal. She described the stakes, the anguish, the doubt. But she also spoke of hope, the belief that, with courage and conviction, even the most formidable power could be held accountable. Her words traveled beyond the auditorium, broadcast across news outlets, and shared on social media with captions like "Crockett to save the courts." But Jasmine cared less about the spotlight and more about the legacy of her work, a judiciary that jittered at the prospect of hidden deals, a generation of lawyers and lawmakers mindful that transparency would be their watchword. She ended her speech by saying, "Justice is not a static monument. It is a living promise that binds us together. And as long as there are those willing to light the darkness, the promise remains unbroken." The aftermath of the Supreme Court scandal settled into the politics of daily life, committee assignments, pressing legislation, and the unending churn of electoral campaigns. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift had occurred. Judges hesitated before calling a former campaign aide. Clerks paused before forwarding a message. Administrators hovered over every decision with an acute sense of accountability. In the coffee shops near the Capitol, interns debated the merits of the new transparency requirements. In universities, curriculums were amended to include mandatory courses on judicial ethics. And at the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Hopkins, who had once guarded the court's secrets fiercely, now presided over a bench that had begun its own internal introspection. Judges questioned each other, sought peer review on sensitive drafts, and embraced the principle that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Yet in the quiet of her own home, Jasmine found peace only when she allowed herself to step away from the whirlwind. Early one summer morning, while the Capitol lawn glistened with dew, she walked through the nearby Barton Springs Park, the faint scent of wildflowers in the air. She carried a book of poetry by her father, a former civil rights activist, and read lines that reminded her why she had entered the arena of politics in the first place, to give voice to the voiceless, to lift the veil of secrecy that cloaked power, to ensure dignity was afforded to every citizen. The chirping of cardinals in the trees, the distant hum of morning traffic, and the gentle flow of the creek beneath the bridge felt like a benediction. She closed her eyes and let the cool breeze wash over her, thinking how fragile and beautiful democracy was, how easily it could be corrupted, yet how resilient it could be when people chose to stand up. She thought about Jasmine Crockett one more time, the congresswoman who had stared down a political empire and refused to blink. She recognized that her journey was far from over. There would always be new crises, fresh challenges, and shadows lurking at the edges of power. But she felt fortified by the fact that, in the face of a seismic event that threatened to fracture the judiciary, she had proved that integrity could prevail. And she understood that her role was not to rest on laurels, but to carry forward the torch of transparency, to remind those who slept at the wheel that vigilance was not optional. As she walked back toward Congress, the morning light casting long shadows on the path, she thought of the people who had cheered her on and those who had tried to tear her down. She felt gratitude for her staff, who had labored beside her, and love for Franklin, who had been her anchor. She wondered 3 steps ahead, what would be the next threat? Would there be another attempt to bend the courts? Would money and influence find a new avenue to exploit? Perhaps. But she knew this. As long as people were ready to question, ready to expose, and ready to demand accountability, there remained hope for the Republic. In the months that followed, Jasmine Crockett's name became synonymous with judicial reform. She was invited to speak at international conferences on governance, consulted by foreign governments seeking to safeguard their own courts, and even lauded by neutral observers for her deft navigating of bipartisan tensions. Yet she remained grounded, always returning to her office in D.C., poring over constituent letters, listening to the stories of teachers, veterans, and everyday citizens who felt emboldened to speak up. Each letter served as a reminder that her work transcended politics. It was a covenant with the American people. Late one afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the glass windows of her office, Jasmine sat at her desk reflecting on the journey. She recalled the opening scene with Donald Trump Jr., his shocked expression as she revealed his role in the leak, the hush that fell over the Judiciary's Ethics Committee, the ripple effect that cascaded through the judiciary and into the public consciousness. She remembered walking the Supreme Court steps, speaking with Chief Justice Hopkins, and feeling the weight of history pressing against the future. She thought about the days of drafting legislation, the nights where doubt whispered that she could have done more, and the countless times she asked herself whether she was making the right decisions. In those moments of reflection, she realized that her greatest achievement wasn't a bill passed or a scandal exposed. It was restoring faith in the idea that power, no matter how vast, could be held in check by people brave enough to speak the truth. A soft knock on her office door jolted her back to the present. Maria Alvarez stepped in, a stack of new memos in her arms. "Congresswoman," Maria said quietly, "you have a meeting in 10 with the Joint Committee on Ethics to discuss follow-up measures." Jasmine nodded, her thoughts already shifting to the next challenge. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and looked out the window at the Capitol dome bathed in twilight. She felt a familiar spark ignite within her, a sense of purpose renewed by every challenge that lay ahead. She turned back to Maria and smiled, a look that conveyed both determination and warmth. "Let's get to work," she said. And with that, Jasmine Crockett prepared to engage in the ongoing project of safeguarding democracy, one step, one decision, one voice at a time. If you want more jaw-dropping political dramas starring Jasmine Crockett, hit subscribe now.